Section 4 of Bushido, The Soul of Japan, by Inatsu Nitobe. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Veracity or truthfulness and honor. To the question, quote, which is the more important, to tell the truth or to be polite, end quote, the Japanese are said to give an answer diametrically opposite to what the American will say. But I forbear any comment until I come to speak of veracity or truthfulness, without which politeness is a farce and a show. Quote, propriety carried beyond right bounds, says Masamune, becomes a lie, end quote. An ancient poet has outdone Polonius in the advice he gives, quote, to thyself be faithful, if in thy heart thou strayest not from truth, without prayer of thine the gods will keep thee whole, end quote. The apotheosis of sincerity to which Tzu Tzu gives expression in The Doctrine of the Mean attributes to it transcendental powers, almost identifying them with the divine. Quote, sincerity is the end and the beginning of all things. Without sincerity there would be nothing. End quote. He then dwells with eloquence on its far-reaching and long-enduring nature, its power to produce changes without movement, and by its mere presence to accomplish its purpose without effort. From the Chinese ideogram for sincerity, which is a combination of word and perfect, one is tempted to draw a parallel between it and the Neoplatonic doctrine of logos. To such height does the sage soar in his unwonted mystic flight. Lying or equivocation were deemed equally cowardly. The Bushi held that his high social position demanded a loftier standard of veracity than that of the tradesman and peasant. Bushi no Ichigon, the word of a samurai, or in exact German equivalent, ein Ritterwort, was sufficient guarantee of the truthfulness of an assertion. His word carried such weight with it that promises were generally made and fulfilled without a written pledge, which would have been deemed quite beneath his dignity. Many thrilling anecdotes were told of those who atoned by death for ni gon, a double tongue. The regard for veracity was so high that, unlike the generality of Christians, who persistently violate the plain commands of the teacher not to swear, the best of samurai looked upon an oath as derogatory to their honor. I am well aware that they did swear by different deities or upon their swords, but never has swearing degenerated into wanton form and irreverent interjection. To emphasize our words, a practice of literally sealing with blood was sometimes resorted to. For the explanation of such a practice, I need only refer my readers to Goethe's Faust. A recent American writer is responsible for this statement, that if you ask an ordinary Japanese which is better, to tell a falsehood or be impolite, he will not hesitate to answer, quote, to tell a falsehood, end quote. Dr. Peary, footnote, Peary, The Gist of Japan, page 86, end footnote, is partly right and partly wrong. Right in that an ordinary Japanese, even a samurai, may answer in the way ascribed to him, but wrong in attributing too much weight to the term he translates falsehood. This word, in Japanese, uso, is employed to denote anything which is not a truth, makoto, or fact, honto. Lowell tells us that Wordsworth could not distinguish between truth and fact, and an ordinary Japanese is, in this respect, as good as Wordsworth. Ask a Japanese, or even an American of any refinement, to tell you whether he dislikes you or whether he is sick at his stomach, and he will not hesitate long to tell falsehoods and answer, quote, I like you much, end quote, or, quote, I am quite well, thank you." To sacrifice truth merely for the sake of politeness was regarded as an empty form, kyo rei, and deception by sweet words, and was never justified. I own I am speaking now of the Bushido idea of veracity, but it may not be amiss to devote a few words to our commercial integrity, of which I have heard much complaint in foreign books and journals. A loose business morality has indeed been the worst blot on our national reputation, but before abusing it or hastily condemning the whole race for it, let us calmly study it, and we shall be rewarded with consolation for the future. Of all the great occupations of life, none was farther removed from the profession of arms than commerce. The merchant was placed lowest in the category of vocations: the knight, the tiller of the soil, the mechanic, the merchant. The samurai derived his income from land and could even indulge, if he had a mind to, in amateur farming, but the counter and abacus were abhorred. We knew the wisdom of this social arrangement. Montesquieu has made it clear that the debarring of the nobility from mercantile pursuits was an admirable social policy, in that it prevented wealth from accumulating in the hands of the powerful. The separation of power and riches kept the distribution of the latter more nearly equable. Professor Dill, the author of Roman Society in the Last Century of the Western Empire, has brought afresh to our mind that one cause of the decadence of the Roman Empire was the permission given to the nobility to engage in trade, and the consequent monopoly of wealth and power by a minority of the senatorial families. Commerce, therefore, in feudal Japan did not reach that degree of development which it would have attained under freer conditions. The obloquy attached to the calling naturally brought within its pale such as cared little for social repute. "Call one a thief, and he will steal," put a stigma on a calling, and its followers adjust their morals to it, for it is natural that, "the normal conscience," as Hugh Black says, rises to the demands made on it and easily falls to the limit of the standard expected from it. It is unnecessary to add that no business, commercial or otherwise, can be transacted without a code of morals. Our merchants of the feudal period had one among themselves, without which they could never have developed, as they did, such fundamental mercantile institutions as the guild, the bank, the bourse, insurance, checks, bills of exchange, etc. But in their relations with people outside their vocation, the tradesmen lived too true to the reputation of their order. This being the case, when the country was opened to foreign trade, only the most adventurous and unscrupulous rushed to the ports, while the respectable business houses declined for some time the repeated requests of the authorities to establish branch houses. Was Bushido powerless to stay the current of commercial dishonor? Let us see. Those who are well acquainted with our history will remember that only a few years after our treaty ports were opened to foreign trade, feudalism was abolished, and when with it the samurai's fiefs were taken and bonds issued to them in compensation, they were given liberty to invest them in mercantile transactions. Now you may ask, "Why could they not bring their much boasted veracity into their new business relations, and so reform the old abuses?" Those who had eyes to see could not weep enough. Those who had hearts to feel could not sympathize enough with the fate of many a noble and honest samurai who signally and irrevocably failed in his new and unfamiliar field of trade and industry, through sheer lack of shrewdness in coping with his artful plebeian rival. When we know that 80% of the business houses fail in so industrial a country as America, is it any wonder that scarcely one among 100 samurai who went into trade could succeed in his new vocation? It will be long before it will be recognized how many fortunes were wrecked in the attempt to apply Bushido ethics to business methods. But it was soon patent to every observing mind that the ways of wealth were not the ways of honor. In what respects, then, were they different? Of the three incentives to veracity that Lecky enumerates, viz., the industrial, the political, and the philosophical, the first was altogether lacking in Bushido. As to the second, it could develop little in a political community under a feudal system. It is in this philosophical and, as Lecky says, in its highest aspect, that honesty attained elevated rank in our catalogue of virtues. With all my sincere regard for the high commercial integrity of the Anglo-Saxon race, when I ask for the ultimate ground, I am told that, quote, honesty is the best policy, end quote, that it pays to be honest. Is not this virtue, then, its own reward? If it is followed because it brings in more cash than falsehood, I am afraid Bushido would rather indulge in lies. If Bushido rejects a doctrine of quid pro quo rewards, the shrewder tradesman will readily accept it. Lecky has very truly remarked that veracity owes its growth largely to commerce and manufacture. As Nietzsche puts it, quote, honesty is the youngest of virtues, end quote. In other words, it is the foster child of industry, of modern industry. Without this mother, veracity was like a blue-blood orphan whom only the most cultivated mind could adopt and nourish. Such minds were general among the samurai, but, for want of a more democratic and utilitarian foster mother, the tender child failed to thrive. Industries advancing, veracity will prove an easy, nay, a profitable virtue to practice. Just think, as late as November 1880, Bismarck sent a circular to the professional consuls of the German Empire, warning them of, quote, a lamentable lack of reliability with regard to German shipments, inter alia, apparent both as to quality and quantity, end quote. Nowadays we hear comparatively little of German carelessness and dishonesty in trade. In 20 years her merchants learned that in the end honesty pays. Already our merchants are finding that out. For the rest, I recommend the reader to 2 recent writers for well-weighed judgment on this point. Footnote: Knapp, Feudal and Modern Japan, Volume 1, Chapter 4. Ransom, Japan in Transition, Chapter 8. End footnote. It is interesting to remark in this connection that integrity and honor were the surest guarantees which even a merchant debtor could present in the form of promissory notes. It was quite a usual thing to insert such clauses as these, quote, in default of the repayment of the sum lent to me, I shall say nothing against being ridiculed in public, end quote. Or, quote, in case I fail to pay you back, you may call me a fool, end quote, and the like. Often I have wondered whether the veracity of Bushido had any motive higher than courage. In the absence of any positive commandment against bearing false witness, lying was not condemned as sin, but simply denounced as weakness, and as such highly dishonorable. As a matter of fact, the idea of honesty is so intimately blended, and its Latin and its German etymology so identified with honor, that it is high time I should pause a few moments for the consideration of this feature of the precepts of knighthood. The sense of honor, implying a vivid consciousness of personal dignity and worth, could not fail to characterize the samurai, born and bred to value the duties and privileges of their profession. Though the word ordinarily given nowadays as the translation of honor was not used freely, yet the idea was conveyed by such terms as na, name, men moku, countenance, guaibun, outside hearing, reminding us respectively of the biblical use of name, of the evolution of the term personality from the Greek mask and of fame. A good name, one's reputation, the immortal part of one's self, what remains being bestial, assumed as a matter of course, any infringement upon its integrity was felt as shame, and the sense of shame, ren chi shin, was one of the earliest to be cherished in juvenile education. Quote, "You will be laughed at," end quote. Quote, "It will disgrace you," end quote. Quote, "Are you not ashamed?" end quote, were the last appeal to correct behavior on the part of a youthful delinquent. Such a recourse to his honor touched the most sensitive spot in the child's heart, as though it had been nursed on honor while it was in its mother's womb. For most, truly, is honor a prenatal influence, being closely bound up with strong family consciousness. Quote, "In losing the solidarity of families," says Balzac, "society has lost the fundamental force which Montesquieu named honor." End quote. Indeed, the sense of shame seems to me to be the earliest indication of the moral consciousness of our race. The first and worst punishment which befell humanity in consequence of tasting, quote, "the fruit of that forbidden tree," end quote, was, to my mind, not the sorrow of childbirth, nor the thorns and thistles, but the awakening of the sense of shame. Few incidents in history excel in pathos the scene of the first mother plying with heaving breast and tremulous fingers her crude needle on the few fig leaves which her dejected husband plucked for her. This first fruit of disobedience clings to us with a tenacity that nothing else does. All the sartorial ingenuity of mankind has not yet succeeded in sewing an apron that will efficaciously hide our sense of shame. That samurai was right who refused to compromise his character by a slight humiliation in his youth. Quote, "Because," he said, "dishonor is like a scar on a tree, which time, instead of effacing, only helps to enlarge." End quote. Mencius had taught, centuries before, in almost the identical phrase, what Carlyle has latterly expressed, namely, that, quote, "shame is the soil of all virtue, of good manners and good morals." End quote. The fear of disgrace was so great that if our literature lacks such eloquence as Shakespeare puts into the mouth of Norfolk, it nevertheless hung like Damocles' sword over the head of every samurai, and often assumed a morbid character. In the name of honor, deeds were perpetrated which can find no justification in the code of Bushido. At the slightest, nay, imaginary insult, the quick-tempered braggart took offense, resorted to the use of the sword, and many an unnecessary strife was raised, and many an innocent life lost. The story of a well-meaning citizen who called the attention of a bushi to a flea jumping on his back, and who was forthwith cut in two, for the simple and questionable reason that inasmuch as fleas are parasites which feed on animals, it was an unpardonable insult to identify a noble warrior with a beast. I say, stories like these are too frivolous to believe. Yet the circulation of such stories implies three things. 1. That they were invented to overawe common people. 2. That abuses were really made of the samurai's profession of honor. And 3. That a very strong sense of shame was developed among them. It is plainly unfair to take an abnormal case to cast blame upon the precepts, any more than to judge of the true teaching of Christ from the fruits of religious fanaticism and extravagance, inquisitions and hypocrisy. But, as in religious monomania, there is something touchingly noble, as compared with the delirium tremens of a drunkard, so in that extreme sensitiveness of the samurai about their honor do we not recognize the substratum of a genuine virtue? The morbid excess into which the delicate code of honor was inclined to run was strongly counterbalanced by preaching magnanimity and patience. To take offense at slight provocation was ridiculed as short-tempered. The popular adage said, quote, "To bear what you think you cannot bear is really to bear." End quote. The great Ieyasu left to posterity a few maxims, among which are the following, quote, "The life of man is like going a long distance with a heavy load upon the shoulders. Haste not, reproach none, but be forever watchful of thine own shortcomings. Forbearance is the basis of length of days." End quote. He proved in his life what he preached. A literary wit put a characteristic epigram into the mouths of three well-known personages in our history. To Nobunaga he attributed, quote, "I will kill her if the nightingale sings not in time." End quote. To Hideyoshi, quote, "I will force her to sing for me." End quote. And to Ieyasu, quote, "I will wait till she opens her lips." End quote. Patience and long-suffering were also highly commended by Mencius. In one place he writes to this effect, quote, "Though you denude yourself and insult me, what is that to me? You cannot defile my soul by your outrage." End quote. Elsewhere he teaches that anger at a petty offense is unworthy a superior man, but indignation for a great cause is righteous wrath. To what height of unmartial and unresisting meekness Bushido could reach in some of its votaries may be seen in their utterances. Take, for instance, this saying of Ogawa, quote, "When others speak all manner of evil things against thee, return not evil for evil, but rather reflect that thou wast not more faithful in the discharge of thy duties." End quote. Take another of Kumazawa, quote, "When others blame thee, blame them not. When others are angry at thee, return not anger. Joy cometh only as passion and desire part." End quote. Still another instance I may cite from Saigo, upon whose overhanging brows, quote, "shame is ashamed to sit." End quote. Quote, "The way is the way of heaven and earth. Man's place is to follow it. Therefore make it the object of thy life to reverence heaven. Heaven loves me and others with equal love. Therefore, with the love wherewith thou lovest thyself, love others. Make not man thy partner, but heaven, and making heaven thy partner, do thy best. Never condemn others, but see to it that thou comest not short of thine own mark." End quote. Some of those sayings remind us of Christian expostulations, and show us how far in practical morality natural religion can approach the revealed. Not only did these sayings remain as utterances, but they were really embodied in acts. It must be admitted that very few attain this sublime height of magnanimity, patience, and forgiveness. It was a great pity that nothing clear and general was expressed as to what constitutes honor, only a few enlightened minds being aware that it, quote, "from no condition rises," end quote, but that it lies in each acting well his part, for nothing was easier than for youths to forget in the heat of action what they had learned in Mencius in their calmer moments. Said this sage, quote, "'Tis in every man's mind to love honor, but little doth he dream that what is truly honorable lies within himself and not anywhere else. The honor which men confer is not good honor. Those whom Chow the Great ennobles, he can make mean again." End quote. For the most part, an insult was quickly resented and repaid by death, as we shall see later, while honor, too often nothing higher than vainglory or worldly approbation, was prized as the summum bonum of earthly existence. Fame, and not wealth or knowledge, was the goal toward which youths had to strive. Many a lad swore within himself as he crossed the threshold of his paternal home that he would not recross it until he had made a name in the world. and many an ambitious mother refused to see her sons again unless they could, quote, return home, end quote, as the expression is, quote, caparisoned in brocade, end quote. To shun shame or win a name, samurai boys would submit to any privations and undergo severest ordeals of bodily or mental suffering. They knew that honor won in youth grows with age. In the memorable siege of Osaka, a young son of Ieyasu, in spite of his earnest entreaties to be put in the vanguard, was placed at the rear of the army. When the castle fell, he was so chagrined and wept so bitterly that an old counselor tried to console him with all the resources at his command. Quote, "Take comfort, sire," said he, "at the thought of the long future before you. In the many years that you may live, there will come diverse occasions to distinguish yourself." End quote. The boy fixed his indignant gaze upon the man and said, quote, "How foolishly you talk! Can ever my 14th year come round again?" End quote. Life itself was thought cheap, if honor and fame could be attained therewith. Hence, whenever a cause presented itself which was considered dearer than life, with utmost serenity and celerity was life laid down. End of section 4.